Three thugs thought they could intimidate a lone black rancher in rural Montana, but they didn't know they were messing with a former rodeo legend. The lead thug, a man with a scarred face named Silas, spat on the ground. "This is your last warning, Maria. Sell the land or we'll burn it down with you in it." Maria Jackson just stared back from her porch, her hand resting calmly on a coiled rope next to her rocking chair. When Silas saw her unflinching eyes, he paused, a flicker of doubt crossing his face for just a second. If you believe in standing your ground, hit the like button, subscribe for more, and comment with your city and the word justice below. This was Maria Jackson's life now, a quiet existence on a sprawling Montana ranch, a legacy left by her father. The endless sky, the smell of hay, and the hard work were all she had wanted for the last 10 years. She had built a reputation in the local community as a fair, hard-working woman who kept to herself. But that peace was shattered a month ago. A corporation, Apex Land Development, wanted her property for a luxury resort, and they weren't taking no for an answer. When their official offers were rejected, they sent men who didn't bother with paperwork. Silas and his two goons, Cole and Jeb, had started with simple intimidation. Driving their loud truck past her property line at all hours, leaving trash in her pastures. Then it escalated. Fences were cut, letting her cattle wander. A water trough was smashed. Maria reported it all to the local sheriff in the nearby town of Harmony Creek. Sheriff Brody, a man whose salary was likely supplemented by corporate interests, just sighed. "Maria, it's probably just some local boys having fun. There's no proof they did anything. Maybe you should reconsider the offer from Apex. It's a lot of money." That was the moment Maria knew she was alone. The law wasn't coming to help her. Justice wasn't an option. Today, Silas was done with warnings. "We're not asking anymore," he snarled, stepping closer to the porch. Cole kicked over a milk can with a loud clang, while Jeb laughed stupidly. "Mr. Henderson at Apex is getting impatient. Sign the papers." Maria slowly stood up. She wasn't a large woman, but she stood with a grounded strength that seemed to root her to the very land they were trying to take. She looked past Silas, her gaze fixed on the dusty horizon, as if remembering something from long ago. She had buried that part of herself deep, hoping to never need it again. But when the local sheriff dismissed her complaints and the law turned a blind eye, she realized that some skills were not meant to be forgotten. They were meant to be used. The fight for her land wouldn't be won in a courtroom. It would be won right here, in the dust she called home. How far does a person have to be pushed before they unleash the champion they buried long ago? Maria didn't answer Silas with words. She answered with action. With a fluid motion that seemed impossibly fast, she picked up the coiled rope from beside her chair. It wasn't a showy movement, but one of pure, practiced economy. Before any of the men could react, her wrist snapped forward. The rope uncoiled through the air with a soft hiss, a living thing with a single purpose. The loop sailed past Silas's head, and with a sharp tug from Maria, tightened perfectly around the handle of the overturned milk can lying 10 feet away in the dirt. She yanked it back, the can scraping loudly across the ground until it clattered to a stop at her feet. The three men stood frozen. Jeb's stupid laugh died in his throat. Cole took an involuntary step back. They had expected tears, pleading, or maybe a desperate, clumsy swing from a shovel. They had not expected this. This was skill. This was precision. This was a message. Silas stared at the rope, then back at Maria. The flicker of doubt he'd felt before was now a cold knot in his stomach. He tried to cover his surprise with a sneer. "Just a little rope trick. That won't save you." "This is my property," Maria said, her voice low and even, coiling the rope back with practiced ease. "Get off it. Now." For the first time, Silas felt he had lost control of the situation. He motioned for his men to back away. "This changes nothing," he spat, his voice lacking its earlier conviction. "We'll be back, and we won't be so polite next time." He climbed into his truck, His eyes locked on Maria until the vehicle roared to life and sped away, leaving a cloud of dust in its wake. Maria stood on the porch, watching them go. The quiet rancher was gone. The part of her that had won championships under blistering arena lights was beginning to wake up. The next day, she drove her old pickup into Harmony Creek for supplies. The town felt different. People she'd known for years avoided her gaze. At Pioneer Provisions, the general store, Martha behind the counter rushed through her transaction, barely making eye contact. The fear was palpable. Apex Land Development wasn't just threatening her, they were choking the whole town. Her last stop was Harmony Feed and Tack, a dusty place that smelled of leather and grain, run by an old rancher named Earl. He was one of the few who still met her eyes. "Maria," he said, leaning on the counter. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles. "Heard Silas and his boys paid you another visit." "You heard right," Maria said, inspecting a new lariat, testing its weight and stiffness. "People are saying you ran them off with a rope," Earl said, a hint of a smile in his voice. "Sounds familiar." Maria didn't smile back. "That was a long time ago, Earl. The name Montana Cyclone doesn't just disappear," he said quietly. "I saw you at the national finals. Twice. Never seen anyone ride or rope like that, before or since. Why'd you give it all up?" "I had my reasons," she said, placing the new rope on the counter. "What are you hearing about Apex?" Earl's expression darkened. "They're moving fast. Bought out the Miller Ranch last week. Henderson, the man in charge, he has Sheriff Brody in his pocket. They were seen having dinner at the Steer House last night, laughing like old friends. You're on your own in this, Maria. Completely." Maria paid for the rope and a box of shells for her father's old rifle. "I've been on my own before." As she walked back to her truck, she saw it. Silas's dusty Ford was parked directly in front of the sheriff's office. Sheriff Brody was leaning against the truck's door, sharing a cigarette with Silas. They were both laughing. The sight confirmed everything Earl had said. There would be no reports, no investigations, no justice. There was only them and her. Gripping the new rope in her hand, Maria felt a cold resolve settle over her. They thought this was about land. She was about to teach them it was about respect. That night, Maria did not sleep. She sat in the darkness of her living room, her father's old rifle cleaned and resting across her lap. She wasn't waiting for them to come to her door. She was waiting for them to make a mistake. Around 2 a.m., she heard it. The low rumble of a truck engine, but it cut out far down the road, well before her driveway. They were trying to be quiet. They were done with open threats. She moved silently, slipping out the back door and into the shadows of the barn. She didn't take the rifle. It was too loud, too final. Instead, she grabbed the new lariat she'd bought from Earl. Its stiff, waxed feel was familiar in her hands, an extension of her own will. From the barn, she had a clear view of the west pasture, where the main well and water pump were located. It was the lifeblood of her ranch. Without it, her cattle would be without water in less than a day. Minutes later, 3 figures emerged from the darkness, moving low and fast. They carried heavy tools. A crowbar, a sledgehammer. Silas pointed toward the pump house, and the 3 men started toward it. This was their plan, not a direct assault, but a crippling blow to her livelihood. Maria didn't hesitate. She moved through the darkness like a phantom, her boots making no sound on the familiar earth. She circled around a cluster of old cottonwood trees, putting herself between the men and their truck. They were focused on their target, arrogant in their belief that she was a helpless woman, asleep in her bed. Jeb, the laughing one, was lagging slightly behind the others, carrying the heavy sledgehammer. He was clumsy, his breathing heavy in the still night air. He was the weak link. Maria waited until he was perfectly silhouetted against the faint moonlight. The rope shot out from the darkness. It was a single fluid motion, a whisper of nylon cutting through the air. The loop was wide and open, and it settled perfectly over Jeb's shoulders, pinning his arms to his sides before he even registered what was happening. Maria dug her heels into the dirt and pulled. Jeb let out a choked gasp as the rope tightened, the sledgehammer falling from his grasp with a dull thud. He was yanked backward, his feet scrambling for purchase before he was pulled clean off them. He hit the ground hard, the air forced from his lungs. "What the hell?" Silas spun around, his flashlight beam cutting wildly through the darkness. Cole raised his crowbar, eyes wide with panic. The beam found Jeb on the ground, being dragged backward into the shadows by an unseen force. "Silas, help me!" Jeb cried out, his voice a panicked squeal. But Maria was already moving, using the momentum to haul him quickly behind the cover of the barn. Silas and Cole ran forward, but by the time they reached the spot where Jeb had fallen, he was gone. There was only the sledgehammer lying in the dirt. "Jeb!" Silas yelled into the oppressive darkness. The only answer was the chirping of crickets. A deep, primal fear began to creep into him. This wasn't a rancher. This was a predator. He and Cole exchanged a terrified glance. They were trespassing on her territory, and she was hunting them. Without another word, they turned and ran, sprinting back toward their truck, leaving their partner behind. Inside the barn, Maria tied a final knot, securing Jeb tightly to a support beam. He was shaking, his eyes wide with terror in the dim light. "Please, let me go," he stammered. "We were just gonna break the pump, that's all." Maria looked down at him, her face unreadable. She didn't say a word. She just picked up the fallen sledgehammer from the barn floor, its weight feeling solid and purposeful in her hand. The game had changed. She now had a hostage, and Silas had a reason to be truly afraid. Maria didn't swing the sledgehammer. She simply rested its heavy head on the dirt floor next to Jeb's shaking form. The message was clear. She didn't need to use it for him to understand the threat. "Who do you work for?" she asked, her voice a low whisper in the cavernous barn. "Silas. We just work for Silas," Jeb stammered, avoiding her gaze. Maria crouched down, forcing him to look at her. "Silas works for Apex Land Development, for a man named Henderson. I know that much. What I want to know is how deep Sheriff Brody is in this." Jeb's eyes widened. He started to shake his head, but Maria's cold stare stopped him. "He knows everything," Jeb blurted out. "Brody gets a cut when the land is sold. He told us not to worry about you. Said you were just some stubborn woman who'd fold eventually." Maria nodded slowly, the final piece of the puzzle clicking into place. She pulled out Jeb's phone from his pocket, its screen lighting up his terrified face. She snapped a single, clear photo of him tied to the beam, then another of his driver's license. She looked at the photos, then back at him. "Your friends left you here to rot, Jeb. Remember that." Meanwhile, miles away, Silas and Cole stood in a brightly lit, sterile temporary office on the outskirts of Harmony Creek. Across a modern steel desk sat Mr. A. Henderson, a man in a crisp suit who looked completely out of place in rural Montana. He listened to Silas's stammered explanation without a single change in his expression. When Silas finished, the silence was heavy and suffocating. "Let me be clear," Henderson said finally, his voice soft but laced with menace. "I hired you to handle a simple problem. Instead, you were outsmarted by one woman. You abandoned your post, and you left one of my assets in enemy hands." "Is that an accurate summary?" "She's not what we thought," Silas mumbled. "She's different." "I am not interested in your excuses," Henderson cut him off, standing up. "I am interested in results. You have compromised this entire operation. Get out of my sight. I will handle this myself." As Silas and Cole scrambled out of the office, Henderson picked up his phone and dialed a number. "Sheriff Brody," he said, his voice now friendly and smooth. "We have a situation that requires your official attention. It seems Ms. Jackson has decided to escalate matters." Back at the ranch, Maria worked quickly. She knew they would be back, and this time they wouldn't come in the dark. They would come with badges and the false authority of the law. She went into her house and walked to a heavy wooden chest at the foot of her bed. She opened it. Inside, nestled among old clothes, were two silver championship belt buckles, tarnished with age. One read National Barrel Racing Champion, the other All-Around Cowgirl. She picked up the all-around buckle, its weight a heavy memory in her palm. She remembered the final event, the roar of the crowd, the taste of dust, and the searing pain in her knee after a rival's horse had accidentally collided with hers just before the final run. She'd won that championship on pure grit, but the injury had been severe. The doctors told her another bad fall could leave her unable to walk. It wasn't fear that made her quit. It was the realization that the sport she loved had been poisoned by greed and dirty tactics. She saw the same poison here in Harmony Creek. Her phone buzzed, a text from an unknown number. It was Earl. Brody just left his office. Driving fast, headed your way. Maria put the buckle down. She had left that world behind to find peace, but the world had followed her. She walked to her front porch, Jeb's phone in her hand. She sent the photo of him to Sheriff Brody's personal number with a simple message. He was trespassing. So are you. Turn back. A moment later, she saw the dust cloud on the horizon. A single patrol car coming fast. The confrontation was no longer in the shadows. It was about to happen in broad daylight. Sheriff Brody's patrol car skidded to a halt in a cloud of dust just yards from Maria's porch. He got out, his hand resting on the butt of his pistol, his face a mask of false authority. He had ignored her message. He thought a badge and a gun were enough to win any argument in Harmony Creek. "Maria Jackson," he called out, his voice booming with forced confidence. "I got a report of a missing person, a man named Jebediah Thorne. You know anything about that?" Maria didn't move from her spot on the porch. She held Jeb's phone up so he could see it. "You mean the trespasser I found trying to destroy my property in the middle of the night? He's safe, for now." Brody's eyes narrowed. He started walking toward the porch steps. "That's it. You're under arrest for kidnapping." "On what grounds, Sheriff?" Maria asked, her voice dangerously calm. "You have a warrant? Or are you just running an errand for Mr. Henderson?" The mention of Henderson's name made Brody flinch, but he kept coming. "I don't need a warrant when a felony is in progress. Now put the phone down and place your hands behind your back." He was 2 steps away from the porch, reaching for his handcuffs. "I don't think so," Maria said. She didn't raise her voice. She simply tapped the screen of the phone, dialing a number from Jeb's contact list, a contact labeled Boss. It wasn't Silas's number. It was Henderson's direct line. She put the call on speaker. It rang twice before a smooth, impatient voice answered. "What is it?" "Mr. Henderson," Maria said clearly. "This is Maria Jackson." The silence on the other end was electric. Brody froze on the steps, his hand hovering over his handcuffs. "I have one of your employees here," Maria continued. "Jeb. He was kind enough to explain the entire arrangement you have with Sheriff Brody here. About the kickbacks, about the plan to drive me off my land. It's a very interesting story." "What do you want?" Henderson's voice was a low growl, stripped of its earlier polish. "I want you to call off your dog," Maria said, looking directly at the stunned sheriff. "Tell Sheriff Brody to get back in his car and leave my property. And then you and your company are going to forget my ranch exists. If I see you or your men or even the sheriff's car on my road again, this recording of our conversation, along with Jeb's full confession, goes directly to the state attorney general and the biggest news station in Billings." Brody stared at her, his face a mixture of fury and panic. He was trapped. He looked from Maria to the phone in her hand, realizing he had been completely outmaneuvered. A long, tense moment passed. Then, Henderson's voice came through the speaker, cold and clipped. "Brody, you heard her. Get in your car. Leave." The order was a public humiliation. Brody's authority evaporated in the afternoon sun. Without another word, he turned, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and walked back to his patrol car. He didn't look at Maria as he slammed the door and sped away, leaving another trail of dust that looked like a flag of surrender. Maria ended the call. The immediate threat was gone. She had won the battle, but she knew the war was far from over. A man like Henderson wouldn't give up. He would just find another way. She walked back to the barn and cut Jeb loose. He scrambled to his feet, rubbing his wrists. "Go," she said, pointing toward the road. "Tell Silas and Henderson what happened here, and tell them the Montana cyclone is back." Jeb didn't stop running until the lights of Harmony Creek were a faint glow on the horizon. He stumbled back to Henderson's temporary office, babbling the story to Silas and Cole, who were waiting nervously outside. When the door opened, it wasn't Silas who pushed Jeb inside to face Henderson, but Henderson himself, who calmly pulled him in. Henderson listened to Jeb's frantic retelling of the events, his face a complete blank. He didn't rage. He didn't yell. He slowly picked up a glass paperweight from his desk, turning it over and over in his hand. The silence in the room was more terrifying than any shouting could have been. "Montana cyclone," Henderson said quietly, almost to himself. He set the paperweight down with a soft, deliberate click. He looked at Silas. "You were hired to assess the situation and apply pressure. You told me she was a widow, a rancher. You failed to mention she was a local legend with a particular set of skills." "We didn't know," Silas said, his voice barely a whisper. "Nobody's talked about that stuff in years." "Your ignorance is not my problem," Henderson replied, his voice still level. He stood and straightened his tie. "You and your men are a liability. Your services are no longer required. Get your final payment from my assistant and disappear. If I see any of you in this county again, I'll have Sheriff Brody arrest you for trespassing. He owes me a favor." The three thugs, once so full of arrogance, now looked like scolded children. They filed out of the office without another word, defeated and discarded. Henderson watched them go, then turned his attention to his laptop. He typed the name Maria Jackson and rodeo into a search engine. The screen filled with old articles, grainy photos of a younger Maria on horseback, holding trophies, her smile bright and confident. He studied them for a long time, a cold, calculating look in his eyes. He'd been using a hammer when he needed a scalpel. It was time to bring in a specialist. The next morning, the atmosphere in Harmony Creek had shifted. When Maria drove in for supplies, the averted gazes were replaced with quick, curious glances. The story of Sheriff Brody's retreat had spread like wildfire. At Pioneer Provisions, Martha gave her a small conspiratorial smile and an extra apple for free. The fear of Apex was still there, but now it was mixed with a spark of something else. Hope. At the feed store, Earl was waiting for her. "Heard you sent Brody packing with his tail between his legs," he said, a genuine grin on his face. "The whole town is buzzing. You're all anyone is talking about." "It's not over, Earl," Maria said, loading bags of grain into her truck. "I know," he said, his smile fading. "You poked a hornet's nest, Maria. A man like that doesn't lose. He just changes the rules of the game. Be careful. You may have won the town's respect, but you've also made yourself a much bigger target." He was right. Back at the ranch, Maria didn't relax. She walked to the far end of her property, to a place she hadn't visited in years, a small, dusty arena she and her father had built. The fence posts were leaning, and weeds grew thick in the packed dirt, but the layout was still there. The barrels, faded and peeling, still stood in their triangular pattern. She dropped her lariat in the dust, stretching her arms and legs, feeling the familiar pull of old muscles. She focused on her knee, the one that had ended her career. It ached, a dull, constant reminder of her past. But there was strength there, too. 10 years of hard ranch work had kept her strong. She picked up the rope. For the next hour, she worked. The rope became a blur, a living extension of her arm. She roped fence posts from 30 feet away, then 40. She practiced trick loops, fast releases, and precision throws that would have been impossible for anyone who hadn't spent a lifetime perfecting the craft. The quiet rancher was gone completely, burned away by the fire of necessity. In her place stood the Montana cyclone, shaking off the dust of a decade, her skills sharper and more deadly than ever. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the valley, she heard a vehicle approaching. It wasn't the rumble of Silas's old truck or the whine of Brody's patrol car. This was a different sound, sleek, quiet, expensive. A black SUV she had never seen before rolled slowly up her driveway and stopped. The engine cut, and the silence that followed was heavy. A man in a dark suit, not rumpled like a local but tailored and sharp like Henderson, stepped out of the driver's side. He didn't look like a thug, he looked like a professional, and he was looking right at her. The man who stepped out of the SUV was the opposite of Silas. He was tall, thin, and wore a suit that probably cost more than Maria's truck. He had the polished look of a corporate lawyer, not a backcountry enforcer. He didn't approach aggressively. Instead, he stood by his vehicle, hands clasped behind his back, observing her in the dusty arena. Maria stopped her practice, coiling the rope slowly. She stood her ground, waiting. The silence stretched, broken only by the low hum of the wind. Finally, the man walked toward her, stopping a respectful distance from the arena fence. "Ms. Jackson," he said, his voice calm and professional. "My name is Arthur Vance. I'm a senior associate with Apex Land Development. Mr. Henderson sends his apologies for the crude methods employed by our previous contractors. They were a regrettable necessity, but their termination was a relief to us all." Maria said nothing. She just watched him, her eyes hard. "I'm not here to threaten you, Ms. Jackson," Vance continued, his tone smooth as silk. "I'm here to present you with a new reality. You see, Mr. Henderson has come to admire your tenacity. The Montana cyclone. It's quite a story. But this is not a rodeo, and a rope, no matter how skillfully wielded, is not a defense against a preliminary injunction." He let the legal term hang in the air. "We have a team of geologists ready to conduct environmental impact studies on your property, which we can legally petition for. We have a team of surveyors ready to contest the property lines established in 1947, citing new satellite data. We have a legal team ready to file a dozen motions questioning your ancestral water rights, which will tie up your access to the well indefinitely while the courts decide. We will bankrupt you with legal fees before the first shovel ever hits the ground." This was a new kind of attack. It wasn't about broken fences or physical intimidation. It was a cold, calculated war of attrition, fought on a battlefield she didn't understand. Her skill with a rope was useless against a lawsuit. Her physical strength meant nothing against a court order. "You see," Vance said, a thin, predatory smile touching his lips, "you've been fighting thugs. Now you're fighting the system, and the system is patient, it is relentless, and it is very, very expensive." He took a step closer to the fence. "Mr. Henderson did his research. He knows about your knee, a career-ending injury. Court battles require a lot of standing, a lot of stress. Is that something your body or your bank account can endure for the next 5 to 10 years?" Every word was a precisely aimed blow. He knew her history, her weakness. He was trying to dismantle her resolve from the inside out. For the first time, Maria felt a sliver of genuine fear, not for her safety, but for her home. She could fight off men, but she couldn't fight off a mountain of paperwork designed to crush her. Vance slid a pristine white envelope through the fence boards. It landed softly in the dust at her feet. "That is our final offer. It's triple the initial one, a gesture of Mr. Henderson's respect. Take the money, Ms. Jackson. Buy a new ranch somewhere else, a better one, or stay here and fight and lose everything piece by piece until all you own is this patch of dirt your arena sits on. The offer is valid for 48 hours. He turned and walked back to his SUV without a backward glance. He got in, and the vehicle drove away as silently as it had arrived. Maria stood alone in the fading light, staring at the white envelope in the dust. The lariat in her hand suddenly felt impossibly light, like a child's toy. Earl was right. She had poked the hornet's nest, and now the entire swarm was coming for her. She knew then that she couldn't win this fight alone. She needed an army. Maria watched the SUV disappear, leaving only the pristine white envelope in the dust, the symbol of an easy way out. a fortune in exchange for her soul. She didn't bend down to pick it up. Instead, she walked out of the arena, went to her woodshed, and returned with a small can of lighter fluid. She knelt, popped the cap, and doused the envelope until it was soaked through. Then she struck a match. The paper curled, blackened, and vanished into a brief, intense flame, the ashes scattering in the evening wind. The 48-hour offer had lasted less than 5 minutes. Her decision made, she didn't waste time. She climbed into her old pickup truck and drove straight to Harmony Feed and Tack. The closed sign was already hanging on the door, but the lights were still on inside. She knocked hard. A moment later, Earl appeared, his face etched with worry. He unlocked the door and let her in. "I saw the fancy car leave your place," he said, his voice low. "Figured you'd be stopping by." "They're done with threats, Earl," Maria said, her voice steady. "They're going to use lawyers to bleed me dry. Injunctions, property disputes, water rights, everything." Earl let out a long, slow breath. "That's how they got the Millers. Drowned them in legal bills until they had no choice but to sell for pennies on the dollar. You can't fight that, Maria. No one can." "I can't fight them in a courtroom," she agreed. "So I'm not going to. I'm going to make them fight me in my arena." She looked the old man in the eye, her own gaze burning with an intensity he hadn't seen since her rodeo days. "I need you to spread the word. Tell everyone, every rancher, every farmer, every shop owner who's afraid of Apex, to be at the steer house in 1 hour." "What for?" Earl asked, confused. "I'm going to give them a choice," Maria said. "They can either watch Apex pick us off one by one, or they can stand together and watch me end this." An hour later, the steer house was packed. The usual Friday night crowd was swollen with anxious faces Maria recognized from all over the valley. The air was thick with tension and whispered rumors. Maria walked to the center of the room and a hush fell over the crowd. She wasn't the quiet rancher they knew. She stood with the posture of a champion, a commander. "Most of you know me," she began, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the silence. "You know what Apex is doing. They came to my home today. They didn't threaten me with goons. They threatened me with lawyers. They threatened to do to me what they did to the Millers." She paused, letting the words sink in. A man who looked like Tom Miller flinched in the corner. "They think they can bury us in paper because we're isolated, because we're afraid. They expect me to fight them in a world of judges and lawsuits. I won't." She took a deep breath. "Tomorrow, at noon, I am issuing a public challenge to Mr. Henderson. I'm putting up my ranch, everything I own, in a winner-take-all contest. He can bring any man he wants, any 3 men he wants. We'll settle this the old way, right here in Harmony Creek, in my arena. Not with lawyers, but with skill and grit." A murmur went through the crowd. It was insane. It was a suicide mission. "I am not asking you to fight," Maria said, her voice rising. "I am asking you to be there. I want the whole town to be there. I want reporters there. I want Henderson to face me not in a closed-door meeting, but in the open, with all of you as witnesses. He can't hide behind his money and lawyers when the whole world is watching. Will you stand with me, not with guns, but with your presence?" For a moment, there was only silence. Then, from the back, old Earl's voice boomed. "I'll be there." Tom Miller, who had lost everything, stood up. "So will I." One by one others stood, a woman who ran the diner, a farmer who had been denied a loan from the bank Henderson now controlled. Her army wasn't made of fighters, it was made of witnesses. It was the entire town. The next morning, a notice was pinned to the community board outside the sheriff's office, right where Brody would see it. It was a formal, handwritten challenge to Henderson, outlining the terms. Her land against his claim. A contest of ranching skills. Noon tomorrow. The trap was set. Noon arrived with the heat. Maria's dusty arena was surrounded by a makeshift audience. The entire town of Harmony Creek stood in silent solidarity, their pickup trucks lining the fence, people sitting on hoods and tailgates. A local reporter Earl had called was there with a camera, a sight that made Sheriff Brody, parked 100 yards away, look deeply uncomfortable. Right on schedule, a convoy of black SUVs rolled up the driveway. Henderson stepped out of the lead vehicle, dressed in expensive rancher-style clothing that looked like a costume. Arthur Vance was beside him, holding a leather-bound clipboard. Henderson didn't bring lawyers. He brought 3 men who looked like they were carved from granite. They were professional rodeo cowboys, hired guns for this specific battlefield. Henderson walked to the center of the arena, his smug smile visible to everyone. "Ms. Jackson, I accept your theatrical proposal. A bit of local color before we break ground. Let's get this over with." Maria, mounted on her fastest quarter horse, a powerful mare named Shadow, simply nodded. The first event was barrel racing. Henderson's champion went first, a blur of speed and precision, setting a blistering time. The crowd held its breath. Then it was Maria's turn. She and Shadow moved as one, a fluid dance around the barrels. She didn't just ride, she flowed. She beat his time by less than a second, but it was a clear victory. The town erupted in cheers. Henderson's smile tightened. Score, Maria 1, Henderson 0. The second event was calf roping. Henderson's second man was an expert. He dropped from his horse, flanked the calf, and had it tied in a time that was near professional record. Maria's run was clean and fast, but she couldn't match it. Her knee gave a slight twinge as she dismounted, a small detail only she felt. Vance made a note on his clipboard. Score, Maria 1, Henderson 1. It all came down to a final event. Henderson looked supremely confident. "Your choice, Ms. Jackson. What's the finale?" Maria looked at the 3 massive cowboys he had brought, then she looked at the single lariat in her hand. "One event to decide it all," she declared, her voice carrying across the silent arena. "Your 3 men will stand in the center of the arena. I get 1 rope, 1 throw. If I can catch and subdue all 3 of them at once, you leave Harmony Creek forever. If I miss, the land is yours." A gasp went through the crowd. It was an impossible throw. Henderson laughed out loud. "Catch 3 men with 1 rope? It's absurd, I accept." He saw it as a public surrender. His 3 cowboys grinned, spreading out slightly, confident that no rope in the world could catch all of them. Maria backed Shadow to the far end of the arena. She took a deep breath, the dust, the sun, the faces of her neighbors all fading away. There was only the rope, her arm, and the target. She spurred Shadow into a full gallop. The horse thundered across the dirt, eating up the ground. The cowboys braced themselves. Just as she neared them, Maria stood in her stirrups. Her wrist snapped forward in a motion that was pure instinct, honed over thousands of hours. The rope didn't fly in a simple loop. She threw a complex, wide-spreading houlihan loop that uncoiled in the air like a striking snake. It seemed to defy physics, expanding to an impossible width. It dropped over all 3 men at once, a perfect, inescapable net. Before they could even process what had happened, she dallied the rope to her saddle horn, and Shadow dug in its hooves. The 3 massive men were yanked off their feet, tangled together in a heap in the dust. Silence. Then the entire town exploded in a roar that shook the valley. Henderson stood frozen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated disbelief. Maria trotted Shadow back to the center of the arena, the rope still tight, her 3 opponents subdued. She looked down at Henderson, her expression like flint. "Get off my land!" For a long moment, Henderson was speechless, his face pale with shock and fury. The roar of the crowd was a physical force pressing in on him. Arthur Vance looked at his boss, then at the reporter's camera, capturing every second of their humiliation, and knew the situation was unsalvageable. But Henderson wasn't a man who accepted defeat. He suddenly threw his head back and laughed, a harsh, ugly sound that cut through the cheering. "Bravo!" he shouted, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "A wonderful performance! Truly a masterclass in local theatrics." He turned to the crowd, spreading his hands wide. "But let's be clear, this charming little sideshow changes nothing. It is not a legally binding contract. My lawyers will be filing the injunctions on Monday morning as planned." He pointed a shaking finger at Maria. This was a game. Now we go back to reality. Then he turned his gaze toward the road, where Sheriff Brody was still sitting in his patrol car. "Sheriff, do your job. I want this woman arrested for assault and for holding my men against their will." The crowd's cheers died, replaced by a low, angry growl. This was a step too far. Sheriff Brody, seeing his moment of truth had arrived, put his car in drive and began to roll slowly toward the arena. But he didn't get far. A human wall formed in front of him. Earl stepped out first, his old face set like stone. Tom Miller, who had lost his ranch, stood beside him. Then Martha from the general store and 24 other ranchers and townspeople. They didn't have weapons. They just stood there, their arms crossed, a silent, immovable barrier of defiance. They were no longer just witnesses, they were participants. Brody stopped the car. He looked at the faces of the people he was supposed to protect, then at the reporter who was now filming him. He looked at Henderson, who was screaming for him to run them down. In that moment, Brody made a choice. He wasn't choosing Maria over Henderson. He was choosing self-preservation. He slowly and deliberately put the car in reverse, backed away, and drove off in the direction of town, abandoning his benefactor to the consequences. Seeing his last piece of leverage disappear down the road, Henderson's rage finally broke. But before he could say another word, Arthur Vance grabbed his arm, his grip like steel. "Sir, it's over," Vance said in a low, urgent tone. "The narrative is lost. We have to leave, now." For the first time, Henderson looked truly defeated. He was a man who controlled everything with money and power, and in this dusty arena, he had neither. He allowed Vance to guide him back to the SUV. The crowd parted silently to let them pass, their faces a mixture of contempt and triumph. As the convoy of black SUVs sped away, kicking up a final cloud of dust, Maria finally slackened her rope. The three hired cowboys, humiliated and defeated, scrambled to their feet and ran for the road, not even looking back. Maria dismounted from shadow, her bad knee aching from the strain. She looked out at the faces of her neighbors. They weren't cheering anymore. They were just watching her, a profound sense of respect and gratitude in their eyes. She hadn't just saved her ranch. She had given them their town back. The Montana cyclone hadn't just won a contest. She had started a quiet revolution. The reporter's video was a match thrown on dry tinder. It didn't just go local, it went national. The showdown at Harmony Creek became a viral sensation. The image of Maria, a lone black woman on horseback, roping three hired cowboys at once, was an irresistible modern-day David and Goliath story. Henderson's arrogant dismissal of the contest and his attempt to use the sheriff as his personal enforcer sealed his fate. For Apex Land Development, the fallout was catastrophic. Their stock price nosedived. Activist groups latched onto the story, digging into Apex's other projects and uncovering a pattern of predatory practices. Within a month, Henderson was forced to resign by the board of directors in a desperate attempt to salvage the company's reputation. The Harmony Creek Resort project was officially and permanently cancelled. Sheriff Brody didn't fare any better. The video, combined with the evidence from Jeb's phone that Maria had anonymously forwarded to the state attorney general's office, triggered a full-scale investigation into corruption in the county. Facing indictment, Brody resigned, leaving town in the middle of the night. Harmony Creek would be getting a new sheriff, one chosen by the people, not by corporate interests. The town itself was transformed. The fear that had hung over it like a shroud was gone, replaced by a defiant sense of pride. The ranches and businesses that Henderson had squeezed were no longer isolated targets. They formed a co-op, pooling resources and legal knowledge to protect themselves. Tom Miller, using the video as leverage, launched a lawsuit against the new leadership at Apex and received a settlement that allowed him to buy back a portion of his family's land. Maria's life found a new balance. She was no longer just the quiet woman on the Jackson Ranch. She was a hero, a leader, but she didn't seek the spotlight. Her victory wasn't about fame, it was about peace. The quiet she had sought for 10 years finally returned, but it was a different, richer quiet. It was the peace of a secure home, a united community, and a clear conscience. She spent the following weeks repairing the old arena, not just for herself, but for the town. On Saturdays, she started offering free riding and roping lessons to the local kids. The dusty arena, once a symbol of a buried past, became a place of laughter, learning, and future champions. One sunny afternoon, as she watched a young girl finally manage to rope a practice dummy, Earl leaned on the fence beside her. "You know," he said, "I always wondered why you quit the circuit. But I get it now. You weren't running from anything. You were just waiting for a fight that truly mattered." Maria looked at the kids, at the open sky, at the land her father had left her. She had unearthed the Montana cyclone not for glory or money, but to protect her home. And in doing so, she had found a way for both parts of herself, the fierce champion and the quiet rancher, to finally live in harmony. The dust from Henderson's retreat had barely settled before Maria's story became a permanent part of Harmony Creek's identity. It wasn't just a local tale, it was a testament shared across the country that true strength isn't always measured by wealth or legal power. Sometimes it's measured by the practiced skill in your hands, the unwavering connection to the ground beneath your feet, and the fierce courage burning in your heart. Maria proved that one person, armed with a talent they thought they had buried forever, could force a corporate giant to its knees. She didn't just save her land, she reminded an entire town that their real power didn't come from a corrupt sheriff or a distant government. It came from standing together, shoulder to shoulder, in a wall of silent defiance. The legend of the Montana cyclone was reborn. It was no longer just a memory of a rodeo champion from a bygone era. It was now the story of a protector, a woman who refused to back down, who brilliantly turned her oppressors' arrogance and underestimation into their own downfall. She inspired a community not just to hope, but to act. This story serves as a powerful reminder that the most important battles for what is right are not always fought in sterile courtrooms. Sometimes they are settled in a dusty arena with the whole world watching. Maria Jackson didn't need a badge or a lawsuit to serve justice. She only needed her rope, her unbreakable resolve, and the community that finally chose to stand behind her. This story shows that no matter how powerful and untouchable an enemy may seem, they are never invincible. Henderson thought his money was a shield, but it couldn't protect him from public humiliation. The courage of a single individual became the spark that ignited a fire of change, proving that true justice isn't a gift from the powerful. It's a right, taken by those brave enough to demand it. If you believe that courage, skill, and community can triumph over greed and corruption, show your support by hitting that like button. And be sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss another story of incredible resilience and sweet revenge. Every comment lets us know that these stories are making an impact. It tells us you're here with us, just as the people of Harmony Creek stood with Maria. Show us you're a true member of our community by commenting below with the phrase, "I watched until the end." Your engagement helps us share these vital narratives with the world. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey to justice. But don't go anywhere. The fight isn't over. We have another amazing story of unexpected victory ready for you. Click on the video that's now appearing on your screen to watch it. We'll see you over there.